The American Revolution was not a sudden outburst. It was the culmination of growing discontent simmering beneath the surface of colonial life. The colonists, once content under British rule, began to chafe against increasingly restrictive policies. A burgeoning sense of identity, separate from their British counterparts, began to take root. The Enlightenment, a powerful intellectual movement, fanned the flames of revolution. Thinkers like John Locke, with his radical ideas about natural rights and the consent of the governed, found fertile ground in the colonies. Locke's words resonated deeply with the colonists, planting the seeds of rebellion. The right to life, liberty, and property, once considered privileges bestowed by the crown, were now seen as inalienable rights. The colonists found themselves increasingly at odds with British rule. This growing resentment, fueled by Enlightenment ideals and a burgeoning sense of national identity, set the stage for a revolution. They yearned for the freedom to chart their own destiny. A shared sense of purpose, fueled by Enlightenment ideals, would prove to be a powerful force in the tumultuous years to come. The cry of "taxation without representation" became the rallying cry of the American Revolution. The British government, burdened by the costs of the French and Indian War, sought to increase revenue by imposing a series of taxes on the colonies. These acts, intended to assert control over the increasingly independent colonies, instead ignited the flames of rebellion. The Stamp Act of 1765, requiring colonists to purchase stamps for all printed materials, was met with widespread resistance. The colonists argued that they could not be taxed by a parliament in which they had no representation. "No taxation without representation" echoed through the streets of Boston and beyond. The colonists boycotted British goods, organized protests, and petitioned the king, demanding the act be repealed. The Townshend Acts of 1767, which imposed taxes on goods such as tea, glass, and paper, further inflamed tensions. The idea that a distant parliament could impose taxes on them without their consent was anathema to the colonists' growing sense of self-determination. The British government, facing colonial resistance, eventually repealed the Stamp Act and most of the Townshend Acts. However, the damage was done. The seeds of rebellion had been sown. The struggle for freedom had begun. As tensions escalated, groups like the Sons of Liberty emerged, championing colonial rights and challenging British authority. These clandestine organizations, shrouded in secrecy, became a powerful force in the fight against British rule. They organized protests, disseminated revolutionary ideas, and intimidated British officials. The Sons of Liberty, led by figures like Samuel Adams, were masters of propaganda. They used pamphlets, speeches, and public demonstrations to sway public opinion against British policies. Their actions, often daring and provocative, served to galvanize colonial resistance. The British government, alarmed by the growing unrest, responded with increased military presence in the colonies. The presence of British troops in Boston, intended to quell dissent, only served to heighten tensions. The Boston Massacre of 1770, in which British soldiers fired upon a crowd of unarmed colonists, killing 5, marked a turning point. The incident, skillfully exploited by the Sons of Liberty, became a symbol of British brutality. The colonies were on the brink of revolution. The question was no longer if, but when. The Boston Tea Party, a brew of rebellion. The Boston Tea Party, a daring act of defiance, marked a pivotal moment in the road to revolution. In 1773, the British East India Company, facing financial ruin, was granted a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies. This act, seen by the colonists as a blatant attempt to control their economy, proved to be the final straw. On December 16, 1773, a group of colonists disguised as Native Americans boarded British ships docked in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea into the water. The Boston Tea Party, a symbolic act of defiance, sent shockwaves across the Atlantic. The British government, outraged by the Boston Tea Party, responded with a series of punitive measures known as the Coercive Acts or the Intolerable Acts. These acts closed the port of Boston, curtailed colonial self-governance, and allowed for the quartering of British troops in colonial homes. The Intolerable Acts, far from quelling dissent, only served to further unite the colonies in opposition to British rule. The Boston Tea Party transformed the relationship between the colonies and the British Crown. The die was cast, and the colonies were on an inexorable path towards revolution. Lexington and Concord. The first military engagements of the American Revolutionary War, Lexington and Concord, took place on April 19, 1775. The British Army, aiming to capture colonial leaders and seize an arms cache, marched from Boston to Lexington. Warned by riders like Paul Revere, the colonial militias mobilized quickly. At dawn, the British troops encountered 77 Minutemen in Lexington. Shots were fired, and the skirmish left 8 colonists dead. The British then moved on to Concord, where they faced a larger and more organized colonial force. The ensuing battle forced the British to retreat back to Boston, harried by colonial militias along the way. These clashes marked the outbreak of open armed conflict between the colonies and Britain. A nation forged in liberty. The Declaration of Independence, adopted on July 4, 1776, was a bold assertion of the colony's right to self-governance. Drafted by Thomas Jefferson, it articulated the Enlightenment principles of individual liberty and government by consent of the governed. The Declaration proclaimed that all men are created equal, endowed with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This document not only justified the colony's break from Britain, but also laid the ideological foundation for the new nation. Despite facing numerous challenges and setbacks, the colonies persevered. The war culminated in the British surrender at Yorktown in 1781, effectively securing American independence. The birth of a nation and its enduring legacy. The formation of the United States was a monumental achievement, but it was only the beginning. The fledgling nation faced the daunting task of creating a stable and effective government. The Articles of Confederation, the first governing document, proved inadequate, leading to the drafting of the United States Constitution in 1787. This new constitution established a federal system of government with checks and balances designed to prevent any one branch from gaining too much power. The Bill of Rights, added in 1791, enshrined fundamental liberties and protections for individuals. The legacy of the American Revolution endures, reminding us of the enduring struggle for freedom and the ongoing pursuit of a more perfect union.